One afternoon, a teenage girl named Jody went out with her boyfriend Kevin to a store, not to shop but to rob it. They pointed a gun at a store employee. After Kevin took the money from the cashier and returned to their car, Jody threatened to shoot the employee if they didn't open the safe behind them. Strangely, the employee showed no fear and remarked that Jody might not like what was inside. Oddly, the employee mentioned that Jody didn't care about the choices she made in life. Enraged, Jody shot the employee. The scene then shifts to Samantha, known as Sam, who is stranded alone in the middle of an unknown forest. Earlier, Sam had been traveling with her husband, Adam, to visit her in-laws when their car broke down due to running out of gas. Adam went to search for the nearest gas station, while Sam stayed in the car. After 24 hours passed without Adam returning, Sam decided to search for him on her own. She wandered through the forest until she found an abandoned wooden cabin. Inside, she discovered an old radio, a table, chairs, a bed, and a bag containing a plastic pack of peanuts. Starving after not eating for a day, Sam quickly devoured the peanuts. Suddenly, a man entered the cabin. Sam hid under the bed. After grabbing his bag, he left the cabin. Once Sam thought he was far enough away, she tried to flee, but she encountered the man and fell, injuring her leg. The man tended to her wound. His name is Tom, and Sam explained her situation. Her car had broken down and her husband had gone to find a gas station. Oddly, Tom claimed that his own car had been in an accident and that he had been stranded in the forest for 3 days without a phone to call for help. He added that the cabin wasn't his and that the old radio inside was useless. Finding his explanation suspicious, Sam grew fearful and wanted to continue searching for her husband. Tom, however, warned her that nighttime temperatures in the forest could drop to -5 degrees Celsius, which could be deadly without warm clothing. He also pointed out that Sam hadn't eaten much and that the forest was vast. Worried for her husband's safety, Sam lit a cigarette to calm herself. Tom borrowed her lighter to start a fire using old newspaper he had brought, dated November 21st, 2011. After that, Tom asked Sam to show him her car so he could check what the problem was, and it turned out the car really was out of gas. Tom placed a piece of wood on a tree as a marker to indicate they had been there before. Since it was getting dark, Tom suggested they spend the night in the cabin and leave a note in the car in case Adam returned. Luckily, Sam had brought plenty of blankets from her classic car to stay warm in the cabin. In the cabin, Tom gave Sam some water he had collected from a nearby stream. Strangely, when Tom went back to the stream later, he couldn't find it again. Tom planned to transfer fuel from his car to Sam's car so they could search for help and look for Adam at the same time. During their conversation, Sam revealed that she was actually pregnant, which was why Adam had insisted she stay in the car earlier. Sam admitted she was smoking only to calm her nerves. As night fell, Tom opted to sleep on the floor and told Sam to take the bed. That night, Sam had a strange dream in which she was alone in a house, looking panicked as she tried to call someone. The next morning, when Sam woke up, Tom had already left to get the fuel from his car. Suddenly, Sam discovered a woman, Jody, collapsed in front of the cabin. Sam brought Jody inside and found a box containing a music box behind the radio. Meanwhile, the strong wind outside caused the door to rattle several times. When Jody woke up, she was startled to see Sam. Jody quickly ran outside the cabin to look for her boyfriend, Kevin. Suddenly, the sound of a gunshot echoed from the forest, startling Tom and causing him to stumble, spilling the gasoline he was carrying. Moments later, another gunshot rang out. Tom called out, trying to identify who was shooting, but there was no response. Hearing Tom's shouts, Jody grew frightened and, unable to find anyone, returned to the cabin. Smoking a cigarette, Jody remarked that their situation was reminiscent of the movie Deliverance, where a group of people must survive in the wilderness while dealing with hostile locals. However, Sam was unfamiliar with the film and was instead intrigued by Jody's lighter, even though it was an ordinary one. Meanwhile, outside the cabin, Tom briefly heard the sound of an airplane flying overhead, but saw nothing in the sky. Not long after, Tom returned and handed Sam a pair of boots to warm her feet, while also asking about Jody's identity. Jody, however, insisted that Tom explain his situation first. Tom recounted his story. He was stranded in the forest after his car broke down and without a phone couldn't call for help. Sam then shared her situation, explaining that her car had run out of gas and she was forced to take shelter in the cabin because her husband, who had gone to find a gas station, hadn't returned. With the unclear circumstances, Jody wanted to leave, but she changed her mind after Tom warned her about the freezing nighttime temperatures. Tom then asked Jody to share how she ended up there. Jody revealed, without mentioning the robbery, that she was from Detroit. After the robbery shown at the start of the story, she had been abandoned by her boyfriend, Kevin, following an argument. Strangely, Jody couldn't explain how she suddenly found herself in front of the cabin. Reluctantly, Jody agreed to spend the night in the cabin. However, due to Tom's persistence, she was forced to hand over her lighter. Tom reinforced the cabin door with wooden planks to keep the cold out, but Jody began to suspect that Tom might be a murderer who was lying about his accident to trap Sam and herself. Hearing this accusation, Tom grew angry and asserted that he was neither a criminal nor harboring any malicious intentions. He stated that his only goal was survival. That night, Jody dreamed of being in a hospital. The next morning, she tried walking behind the cabin to find help, but her dream had left her shaken, and she heard gunshots again. Frightened, Jody returned to the cabin, where she chatted with Sam. During their conversation, Sam shared that she had been on her way to her in-laws' house with her husband, Adam, to announce her pregnancy, which she had discovered only a week earlier. She mentioned that her baby was due in early November. Jody then revealed that her birthday was also in November, specifically on the 11th. As they talked, both women began to feel unsettled. Jody was certain she was currently in the state of Wisconsin, while Sam distinctly remembered being close to her in-laws' home in Concord, New Hampshire. The issue was that these two locations were separated by hundreds of miles, making their situation even more baffling. Meanwhile, Tom, who was still exploring the forest, found a bullet on the ground and continued marking trees to track how far he had walked. To his shock, even though he was certain he had been walking straight ahead the entire time, he suddenly ended up back at the cabin. This added to the confusion. Jody believed they were in Wisconsin. Sam insisted the forest was in New Hampshire, and Tom thought his accident had occurred in South Dakota. This disparity left all of them even more puzzled about what was truly happening. On top of this, Sam grew increasingly worried about Adam's fate out in the wilderness. That night, it was Tom's turn to have a nightmare, this time involving a gun. Though none of them fully understood their predicament, Tom was convinced that staying in the cabin would ultimately lead to their deaths, as their food and water supplies were running dangerously low. Thus, Tom, Sam, and Jody decided to search for help by venturing along a path behind the cabin they hadn't explored before. As they walked, Sam began recalling a nightmare she had experienced a few days earlier. Suddenly, Jody tripped over something and fell, her foot catching on a door handle buried in the ground. Tom noticed a wad of cash fall from Jody's pocket and became curious about her profession, but Jody ignored him. Tom then forced the door open by breaking its lock, revealing an underground bunker. Inside, they found a map that Sam guessed was about 20 years old, while Jody estimated it to be closer to 50 years old. They also discovered canned food, drinks, and bottles of wine dated from the 1920s or 1930s, all labeled in German. Sam, who had learned some German from her mother, explained that her late father, who was German, had died in the war before she was born. Hearing this, Jody revealed that her father had also been a victim of war. After gathering some food and drinks into a bag, Tom, Jody, and Sam returned to the surface. To their astonishment, they saw the cabin just a short distance away, even though they were certain they had walked straight ahead for a significant distance. The inexplicable nature of their situation left them more unsettled than ever. The three of them eventually returned to the cabin, and Tom suggested that the next day they should split up and head in different directions. While this approach was clearly more dangerous, as they would be walking alone, Tom was willing to take the risk, even if it meant dying. He explained that he had no one waiting for him outside the forest, having been raised in an orphanage in South Dakota with his mother executed long ago. While Tom was outside, Sam became curious about Jodi's wad of cash and asked where she got it. Jodi admitted it was the result of a robbery she had committed with her boyfriend, and it was one of several such heists. Jodi revealed she came from a poor family, which forced her to drop out of school and resort to theft and robbery to survive. However, Sam dismissed her story as a joke because the bills were dated 1984, and Sam naively remarked that the US Treasury wouldn't print money from the future. This revelation startled Jodi, prompting her to ask Sam about the war that killed her father and the year it happened. Sam explained that her father died in World War II, and that for her, the current year was 1962. Jodi was shocked, as she was from the year 1984. When Tom returned, the two women immediately asked him what year he thought it was, and Tom replied that it was 2011. This revelation terrified all three of them, as they realized they were each from different time periods. Tom from 2011, Jodi from 1984, and Sam, 1962. Suddenly, gunshots rang out from outside. Tom peeked through the window and saw a man holding a rifle. To prepare for any confrontation, Tom grabbed an axe, and they called out for help. However, the man, who spoke only German, didn't understand English and continued advancing toward them while aiming his rifle. Since Sam knew a little German, she tried to explain that the three of them were unarmed, but the man knocked Tom unconscious. When Tom regained consciousness, he found himself tied up, as were Sam and Jodi, who were bound to chairs. Based on the dates on the wine bottles and the vintage radio in the cabin, they deduced that they might now be in the man's era, possibly during World War II, around the 1930s or 1940s. They speculated that the underground room they had found earlier was a bomb shelter. Sam asked Tom if he had brought them to the past using a time machine, but Tom explained that technology in 2011 wasn't advanced enough for such feats. Sam was stunned to learn about significant events that had happened since her time, such as the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 and the death of Elvis Presley in 1977. Soon, the man returned to the cabin. He untied Tom's legs and forced him outside at gunpoint. However, Tom managed to free his hands and attempted to escape. The man chased him, ready to fire his rifle. Though Tom initially got away, the man eventually caught up with him and tied him to a tree. The man returned to the cabin and demanded to know what the three of them were doing there. However, he was shocked when he saw Jodi's pendant necklace and immediately snatched it from her. It turned out that the man also had an identical necklace. He pointed his weapon at the two women again. Jodi confessed that the necklace belonged to her grandmother, and, oddly, Sam also revealed she had a similar necklace, given to her by her mother. The man then brought Sam and Jodi to where Tom was tied, and demanded to know if he also had the same pendant. Before he could answer, Tom struck the man, knocking him unconscious, and tied him up inside the cabin. Searching the man's jacket, they found an identification card with the name Hans Humann. Sam was shocked upon hearing the name and revealed that the woman on the pendant was her mother, and her biological father, who died in World War II, was also named Hans Humann. Jodi then admitted that the photo in the pendant was of her grandmother and that she was born on November 11th, 1962. She added that her last name was Cohen, the same last name as Adam, Sam's husband. Jodi explained that she had been raised by Adam's family because her mother, Sam, had died shortly after giving birth to her. Overwhelmed by the revelation, Sam burst into tears and left the cabin. Tom then explained that he also had a pendant identical to theirs, though he didn't have it with him. He disclosed that his mother, Jodi, had been executed for two crimes. First, for murdering his biological father, Kevin, who had been Jodi's boyfriend, and second, for robbing a liquor store and gas station, during which she shot a store clerk. Tom further revealed that he had been born in the South Dakota Women's Prison on December 12, 1985, just 8 months before his mother was executed. He expressed his deep disappointment, explaining that his mother had left behind only a box of marijuana and a pendant, identical to those owned by Hans, Sam, and Jodi. Faced with these shocking truths, Jodi broke down in tears, realizing that her future was destined for tragedy. It became clear that Jody was Tom's biological mother, Sam was Jody's biological mother, and Hans was Sam's biological father. In other words, the four of them were connected as family across generations. Jody stepped outside to talk to Sam and revealed that her father, Adam, had died in the Vietnam War. She also shared how Adam's family despised her, often abusing her to the point that her right elbow was injured. Sam then recounted the story of her biological mother, Jody's grandmother, who died in a car accident along with her new husband shortly after Sam's biological father, Hans, was killed in World War II. Sam decided to return to the cabin to speak with Hans privately and explain everything. She untied Hans, which led to an argument with Tom. However, Sam defended Hans, emphasizing that, as her biological father, they needed to trust each other. Hans, still confused, took his pistol and rifle and left the cabin, haunted by his own nightmares. Sam then recalled her nightmare, in which she died during childbirth while Adam was away fighting in Vietnam. She had been alone with no one to help her, and the ambulance arrived too late. Tom also shared his dream, in which he shot a priest before taking his own life by shooting himself in the head. Meanwhile, Jody had dreamt of being executed for murdering her boyfriend Kevin and for her other criminal acts. This led to a realization. Each of them had dreamed about how they would die in the future. Tom suggested that they had all been brought together in this mysterious cabin in the woods to be given a second chance to change their lives by altering the past, specifically by preventing Hans's death in World War II. The three of them rushed to the bomb shelter to examine the map there. According to the story Sam knew, Hans had died in an air raid after losing contact with his unit. The current situation seemed eerily similar. Hans couldn't communicate with his base because the radio in the cabin was broken. Tom speculated that this day might very well be the day of Hans's death. Tom laid out his reasoning. If Hans survived the war, his wife would have stayed with him. This meant that when Sam went into labor while Adam was fighting in Vietnam, her mother would have taken her to the hospital in time, allowing Sam to survive childbirth. In turn, Jody could have grown up to become a good person rather than falling into a life of crime. Tom himself might have had a brighter future, raised by a loving, non-criminal mother. Although Tom's theory was just speculation, evidence supporting it began to appear. Jody's injured elbow had healed, suggesting that her future was already starting to change because Hans had started to learn the truth. The three of them returned to the cabin, where Hans managed to get the radio working. Despite their warnings, Hans insisted on following orders and completing his mission. However, the radio broadcast horrifying news. The command center had deemed Hans a failure and was planning to bomb the area. Outside the cabin, Hans pointed his rifle at the three of them. Sam desperately tried to convince Hans that if he didn't take shelter in the bunker, he would die in the bombing, dooming the futures of his three descendants. Hans ignored her pleas, prompting Tom to force him toward the bunker. As Jody attempted to help Tom, she was accidentally shot. If Jody were to die, Tom would cease to exist, since it would mean she never gave birth to him. The only solution was to save Hans. Tom chased him into the forest, where the two engaged in a desperate fight between great-grandfather and great-grandson. Fortunately, Hans's rifle was out of bullets, but he managed to escape. However, the forest appeared to be an illusion. No matter which way Hans ran, he always ended up back where he started. Tom used this to his advantage, running in the opposite direction until he eventually caught up with Hans. As they struggled, an airplane flew overhead. Just as Hans was about to shoot, Jody succumbed to her wound and died, causing Tom to vanish instantly, as though he had never existed. Devastated, Sam pleaded with Hans to take refuge in the bunker, urging him to act not just for himself, but for the future of all his descendants. Hans finally relented, running with Sam toward the bunker as bombs began raining down. While dodging falling missiles, Sam was thrown back by an explosion, hitting her head on a rock and losing consciousness. Hans quickly carried her into the bunker, shielding them both from the blasts. Despite his efforts, Sam succumbed to her injuries and disappeared, just like Jody and Tom before her. Time seemed to reset as their bodies vanished into nothingness. The scene returns to 1984, specifically to the store featured at the beginning of the film. This time, Jodie's appearance has changed. She now looks more refined and put together. Instead of pulling out a gun, she takes out a sum of money to pay for the groceries she is purchasing. Moments later, Kevin enters the store with his girlfriend, who is clearly a different woman, as fate has taken a new path. The two proceed to rob the store clerk, and it seems the woman is now on a trajectory similar to what Jodie's life used to be. The scene transitions to Jodie returning home from the store. Her home is now a grand and luxurious mansion. The camera then focuses on a newspaper headline featuring Hans Humann, described as a war veteran and renowned philanthropist who has recently passed away. At this point, Jodie no longer wears the pendant necklace. It is still with her biological mother, Sam, who is now living with her. But there are still two questions. First, what will happen to Tom? Will he still be born to Jodie and her future husband, since Jodie is no longer dating Kevin? And the second question is, how did Hans, Sam, Jodie and Tom all end up together in the cabin? Is it because of the store clerk and the mysterious vault, which seemed to offer a second chance to someone whose life was in chaos? Feel free to theorize as you like. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.